Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors, and I'm so happy that today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic about gut bacteria's impact on cardiovascular health. I want to introduce our presenters for today. I have Jill Jones. Has been a long-time volunteer for TMC for Seniors, and she uses her skills to research new and important health and wellness information for us. And every time she does an amazing job at really digging deep into every topic that she presents on to really share what she's learned. In addition to that, there's just so many discoveries that are reported on each day. And most are written for researchers and physicians, but not in a form that the public can easily use. So Jill is able to translate that information to us and making it easy for us to understand and to put into practice. With her today is also Michele Clark. She is an associate professor and PhD coordinator at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. And Michele and Jill worked very hard on every topic that they sort of unpack for us. So I just want to introduce them today and welcome you for being here.
Hi, Maya.
Thank you.
So I will go ahead, Jill, I have gone up and put your PowerPoint up on the screen for you so that you can get started. And afterwards, you do have an online audience along with an in-person audience today. So I'll come back at the end and we'll answer any questions that come in from our online audience.
Okay, great. Thanks, Maya.
I need to make one correction, and that is I'm retired.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming this morning. Now, I think it was about a year ago, September of last year, I did a presentation on gut bacteria and our overall health. Did anybody attend that? No, some people. Okay, so today what I'm going to do is I'll review some of the concepts from that presentation. And then I'm also going to then spend more time talking about the latest research on what do our gut bacteria have to do with cardiovascular health. So cardiovascular, you probably know, that's your heart and all our blood vessels, our arteries, veins, capillaries. So in other words, what do gut bacteria, those microscopic organisms in our colon, what do they have to do with our risk for stroke and heart attack? And so here are the sources of information that I used in order to gain an understanding of the topic for myself, and also where I go to find the latest research. And these are the top science journals in the world. They're ranked at the top of 30 or 40,000 scientific journals. They always show up in the top 10. But the research here, it's the original research published by the experts who did the actual studies. And so those experts that did the research on the cardiovascular topic I'm going to be presenting today, they came from these universities, primarily these universities. They worked together to publish the research. King's College London is a research university in the UK, and the other ones you're familiar with, Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. So here are some definitions, core concepts that I presented last year. Microbiome refers to the whole community of the microscopic organisms that we have in our gut, along with all their genetic material. So we have a few people walking in, so coming in late. So it's the community of microscopic organisms, almost all of them, not all. Most of them are bacteria. About 90% of these organisms in our gut are bacteria. But there's other fungi, viruses, protozoa, there's all other kinds of stuff in there as well. And their genetic material. So when you hear a topic or you hear a speaker or you read a book or something about gut bacteria, microbiome refers to the community of organisms along with all of their genes. And we know a lot more about their genes today. Diversity, it's the total number of bacteria we have and the different species. So all the different species. So in a particular person in your gut, you may have 200, 300 species of bacteria. Now we hear the word strains. If you look at a yogurt jar or something, you'll see strains of bacteria. Strains are a subspecies. So we've got many trillions of these different kinds of organisms in our gut. So diversity, total number of species, and then how many of each kind that we have, and everybody's different. Oops, go back to that. So food is the most important factor influencing what types of bugs we have in our gut, because it depends. They need food to eat, so they're eating any food we eat through our gut. When it gets down into our colon, these bacteria are eating that food. So food is one of the biggest factors determining what types of bacteria are in there. And higher diversity, what they found by studying these bugs and relating them to overall health over the years, they've discovered that if we have a bigger variety of them in our gut, we tend to have healthier outcomes. We have better health markers. So the fewer types of bacteria that are in there generally means we have higher risk for different diseases. So the topics, this is the way I've organized the presentation for today. Gut microbiome composition and function. Well, composition is just what I was talking about. The different species, the different types of species in our gut, and the numbers of those. And in function has to do with their genes. Their genes tell us what these bugs are actually doing. And there's a lot more emphasis, and you'll see me in my presentation today, emphasizing the function. What are the chemicals they're producing? And then how are those chemicals affecting our overall health? Then the link between, so the research I'm presenting that I mentioned in the beginning, the research is about the different microscopic organisms in our gut, different bacteria, and linked to nutrition, linked to the type of food we are eating, and then also linked to our cardiovascular health markers, like bacteria in your gut can be linked to high blood pressure or high glucose levels, or the amount of inflammation you have in your body. So I'll be talking about the research relating to that. Then the important part is, the good news is these gut bacteria can change based on our lifestyle, and especially the types of food we eat. So they can change very quickly. And when the bacteria in our gut change, that has big impacts on our health. So even small changes in those gut bacteria can make big changes in our overall health. And then I'll talk about some general guidelines. So another piece of good news, I think, is that we don't have to make big changes in our diets or what we're eating. We can make just small changes and small changes in our lifestyle in order to get big wins. So just with small changes, we can get big wins in our health and put our health in a whole new trajectory. So before I go on, I'll define what a gut is. A lot of us think of a gut as our stomach, but a gut is our whole, when people refer to a gut, or when medical people refer to gut, it's our whole digestive tract. So it starts up in the mouth, digesting using, when you bite into an apple or something, all those enzymes come into play and start digesting the food. And then it'll start moving down the esophagus into the stomach. And what happens in the stomach? You get all those acids and more enzymes break food down farther. Then it goes into the small intestine. Anybody know how long the small intestine is? Our small intestine are 22 feet long. So it's a really long pipe. And the job of the small intestines is to absorb those nutrients out of the foods we eat, nutrients being carbohydrates, protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, that kind of stuff, and move it into our bloodstream. So that's what the small intestine does, takes nutrients out of the food, moves it in the bloodstream, and then any fiber or any other waste materials move down into the colon. So the colon then is where most of our gut bacteria are located. There are pockets of bacteria all along the digestive tract, but most of them are in our colon. Nowadays, if you've read any material or research, or it's been in the newspapers and everything, they're calling this community of gut bacteria or gut microbiome, they're calling it an organ system. And the reason is, when you take them all together, they're microscopic. But just the ones in our colon, when you bunch them together, they weigh 3 to 5 pounds. They weigh more than our brain. And so that's trillion, there's 38 trillion of them, that's why. But and they're doing a lot. All those different species in there are making different chemicals. Their secretions, they're eating our fiber, and they're producing waste. And that waste is turning in chemicals that our body actually needs and that our own human body can't make. So that's why they're calling this an organ system, because it does things for us our own cells can't do. They produce that. So this is a picture I thought I wanted you to kind of remember throughout this presentation. This was taken at a lab in Stanford, the microbiome lab in Stanford. And what it's showing here, it's a cross-section of a colon. So it's a slide that's been stained. It's a cross-section of a colon. Up in the corner here, the left corner, those little colored rods are all bacteria. So they're stained bacteria. On the bottom section there, where you see those blue circles, those are colon cells. They're called epithelial cells. But they are our human tissue on the bottom there, and our bacteria at the top. And then in the middle, there's this big green line. That's a mucus layer. And that mucus layer protects our human cells from the bacteria that's in our gut. Because as long as they're in our gut, they're doing good things for us. But if any of their secretions or any of them escape into our human cells, then they cause trouble, we get sick. So that mucus layer is produced, it's actually produced by the gut bacteria, and it's produced by this layer of cells on the bottom. So you've heard of leaky gut, probably. Well, what happens is, if you have the wrong kind of bacteria in there, they start eating that layer away. And then you can get you can start getting inflammation, because some of this might leak into our human tissue. So I wanted to play a little short video. It's only, I think, 3 minutes long. But this is, if not the world's expert, one of the world's experts in the gut microbiome. He's a professor at King's College London. He's an epidemiologist and a geneticist. He's been studying twins for over 30 years. And he's been looking at their genes and trying to figure out why one twin can get cancer, but the other one's very healthy. And he kept looking at the genes over the years, and he said it really wasn't until 10 years ago that he discovered it's really those bacteria in our gut that are making the difference in the health outcomes in all these twins. So I'll let you hear from him.
Yeah, and I also changed my mind on people always asking how you describe the gut microbes or gut microbiome, which is the community of them. And we used to be trying to work out what each bug was doing. How was it? They thought maybe it was eating something else or having some direct effect on us. But it turns out they're all producing chemicals, thousands, hundreds of thousands of chemicals. And that's why we evolved with them, because the human body can only reproduce a handful of gut hormones itself to break down food, etc. And it relies on having all these other organisms inside our intestines to do the vast majority of the work for us. And we've known that they produce vitamins, vitamin B, etc. You know they produce serotonin for brain health and neurotransmitters. And there will be thousands of other chemicals they're all producing. And we now know that this is the key, because the better your pharmacy is equipped, the better your body's going to be adapted to aging and health, etc., etc. So rather than thinking about each of these microbes as individuals trying to work out, what they're eating or fighting, or how they might be causing us infection, we've got to start thinking very differently and saying, okay, what are these chemical factories doing? And how do we make sure those factories are well supplied? Because the bigger the arsenal of chemicals we've got, the more we can help our immune system, because a lot of these chemicals are going directly just to the gut lining where most of the immune cells in our body are. Most people think our immune system is somewhere up in our neck or our bone marrow. But no, most of it's in our intestine. And it's there for a reason, because it's absolutely crucial that it's in aligned with our gut health and what we're eating. And the microbes are the intermediary between our food and our immune system. So that balance, we're only just realizing this, how crucial it is. And it's our immune system that we now know is not just fighting infections, but it's fighting aging, because it's mopping up a lot of the damage of aging cells. It's also picking off early cancers before they get going. And also this balance between overreaction and allergies, autoimmune disease, getting that balance right, which, as we know, in the US is a major epidemic, because we've lost this power of our immune system to come well. And a lot of this is coming because of the poor health of our gut.
So just to recap what Dr. Spector was saying here, they do more for us than just help with digestion. But even in digestion, they do certain things our own cells can't do. They know how to digest fiber. So when the fiber gets into our gut, they take over and start extracting more nutrients from it. But our human cells, they say, only has about 17 genes that deal with fiber, whereas these bacteria have 60,000 genes that deal with breaking down fiber. So we really depend on them. And Dr. Spector mentioned the immune system. If you remember that picture I showed you, the slide that had the bacteria in there, and I mentioned those human cells. Well, just underneath those human cells is our immune system. So our immune cells, those different white blood cells, are located there. You've heard the term 70% of our immune system's in our gut. Well, they're located close to these bacteria and keeping an eye out for any trouble that might happen. Because a lot of the pathogens that we take into our body come in through our digestive system. Metabolism is another one. We'll talk more about metabolic health, but most of us, when we think of metabolism, we think of weight loss or burning calories or something. But metabolism really stands for all of the chemical reactions in our body. Some of the chemical reactions break molecules down and make them available to our bodies to use. Some of the chemical reactions build up molecules and repair our tissue and build muscle. So metabolism is an important concept, and all these chemical reactions, they're driven by food. Food is the raw material for the energy for our cells, and that's why food is so important. And he also mentioned these bacteria do produce chemicals, and you've heard this too. Serotonin is produced in our gut, dopamine, and so forth. A lot of our mood chemicals are made by these gut bacteria. So what I thought I'd do, I'll try to get through this real quick, but for my own ability to understand this, I drew out a picture comparing a human cell to a bacteria, and bacteria is single-celled organisms. So the human cell over here on the left, there's about 30 or 40 trillion of them, and in our gut bacteria, there's 38 trillion bacteria in our gut. So it's about 1-to-1, a lot of bacteria. But the difference is the bacteria, each species has their own set of genes. So each species has different genes, whereas in our human cells, all those trillions of human cells we have, they all have the same genes. Every single cell in our body has the same set of genes. Some, they're just not all turned on. A lot of them are turned off in every cell. But when you think about it now, the bacteria in our gut there's over 3 million genes versus our 22,000 genes. And so those genes are telling the system what to do, what chemicals to manufacture. The lifespan of bacteria, only 20 to 30 minutes. They keep dividing. They're hard to kill. They keep dividing rapidly. So in an hour, you'll have 3 generations. And that again keeps making variations of all those genes. Our genes remain stable. We can't do much to change our gene. We can't do anything, I guess, to change our own genes. We get them from our parents and they're there till we die. But it's different with these bacteria. Some of the species come and go, and they're changing rapidly, but they adapt rapidly, and we can change them. So you look at the 1% of the genes that are in our cells, but then you look at 99% of the genes in our bodies that belong to these bacteria. Those are the ones we can change, and that's what this presentation is all about. So human genes, all of us we share the same type of genes. We all have genes for eye color, hair color, and so forth, for all our traits. But if you look at our microbiomes in this room, there's only maybe we have 25% in common. So and then that'll be quite a variety of bacteria. So it's like a fingerprint. Everybody's gut microbiome is unique. Even twins, they only share about 34% or so of their bacteria the same. One of these chemicals, I didn't want to spend a lot of time introducing new words, but this one comes up over and over again because it's such an important chemical for our body. And it's only made by the bacteria in our gut. So we have to have the right type of bacteria making a whole variety of different kinds of chemical compounds called short-chain fatty acids. But they're the ones that help maintain that intestinal barrier, that green mucus layer that I showed you. They help regulate our immune response. They're communicating with our immune system. They control our blood glucose levels, and I'm going to show you a quick video on that. Plus, they produce hormones in the gut that tell your brain when you're full. So we have gut hormones that tell our brain that we've had enough to eat, and we need those type of bacteria in there to send those signals to our brain so we don't overeat. So this professor at UC San Diego, he is one of the founders of something called the American Gut Project. And that's a joint project between a number of universities. But anyway, he gave a really good description about what's the link between these gut bacteria and our glucose levels.
I mean, how does blood glucose from your diet, how is that remotely influenced by bacteria? Well, remember, your blood glucose is controlled in your body by this production of insulin and incretin, various hormonal enzymes that allow for the regulatory activity of blood glucose in the body, right? Interestingly, bacteria in the gut break down food substrates like fiber to synthesize chemicals like short-chain fatty acids like butyrate or propionate. These compounds are incredibly important in regulating how the pancreas and the islet cells in the pancreas synthesize that insulin. So if you don't have if your microbiome is not producing enough short-chain fatty acid to stimulate the islet cells to control insulin production, it will cause a massive dysregulation in your blood glucose levels. If you're pre-diabetic, one of the fundamental things we've noticed for a while, right, is to consume more fiber, consume more complex carbohydrates, which will stimulate the bacteria to synthesize more of these fatty acids. And those fatty acids are essential in helping the pancreas to regulate insulin production. It's a balancing act. The microbes mediate the relationship between food and how your blood glucose levels fluctuate.
Okay. So what I thought I'd do is I made kind of this little cartoon to walk you through the digestive process. What happens when we eat a diet in simple carbs? So simple carbs like white bread, white rice, cookies and sweets and everything, compared to what happens when we eat high fiber foods. So we'll start out with the simple carbs. What happens is it goes down winds up into the small intestine where nutrients are extracted, but there aren't any nutrients, so it gets immediately pushed out into the bloodstream. And if we eat a lot of simple carbs, then they're moving into the bloodstream very quickly and turning into glucose. Now, if you take high fiber, like broccoli, what happens with it? It'll move slower through the digestive process. And so then it'll keep moving down, and when it gets nutrients extracted in the small intestine, and then it moves over into the colon, the fiber part will get into the colon, and then it finds the right bacteria. There's a certain type of bacteria like broccoli, and then they'll consume it, and what happens is we get these short-chain fatty acids. So now you noticed how much slower it moved. When food moves slower and it gets down to say around here at the bottom of the small intestine, that's how far the food needs to go to get those hormones released to tell your brain you're getting full. With simple carbs like cake and stuff, they get into the bloodstream so fast, you're not getting the signal to the brain. So you're eating more than you normally would because you don't know you're really getting full. So anyway, fruit, what happens with fruit? Yes, it's got some sugars in there, but it'll move slower. You will get glucose, but you'll get the short chain fatty acids and you'll get those hormones released. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And of course, what we're saying here is a small change in diet will cause a change in the chemical output of these bugs in your gut. And so what will happen is when you start changing the food you eat, like some of them like cherries, some of them like fat, they all have their different things they prefer. But the bacteria that we want, the healthy ones that are producing the healthy chemicals, they like a lot of plants, primarily plants. But that's not to say that you give up meat or anything else. We'll see that a little later on. It's just about balance. And with our American diet, we're not getting enough balance of all the fiber, the different variety of fiber that we need. And so now those are kind of the basic concepts. What I'm going to do is move into the research about how this all links to our cardiovascular health. So this PREDICT is the name of a particular program. It's a series of studies. It's ongoing. And it's in collaboration between all those schools that I showed you in the beginning, researchers from those different universities. And what they have done, and it's very unique because these are very costly projects. That they've done is they've taken over 1,000 people and sequenced the genes, the genome of the whole gut microbiome. So 3 million genes in your gut. So they've taken all these individuals and they've mapped out all the different bacteria they have in their gut. we have the tools. We couldn't do this 5 years ago. You couldn't do that. Today we have the tools with AI type tools and very speedy computers. So that's why they can do it today at a lower cost. But anyway, they looked at the bacteria in their gut, and then they looked at these individuals and what type of diet they were on, what kinds of food they were eating. And they drew a relationship, an association between food and the type of bacteria in their gut. They did the same type of thing for their metabolic health. So they gave them a physical, looked at their blood pressure, glucose levels, HDL, LDL, all those things that we get tested for. We go for a physical. And so then they found clear links between the type of foods they ate, dietary patterns, and also the different health markers, how well they were doing with their metabolic health markers. And so they did find in the first year, which was about 3 years ago, the first year of the study, they identified 15 bugs. They called them good bugs, but that mapped to good health markers. So there were certain individuals that they had this group, this community of bacteria tended to have better metabolic health markers. And the same thing, they found 15, they identified 15 types of bacteria that related to poor health markers for metabolic health. And the same thing with foods. So those same bacteria, that community of bacteria, they found that those people were eating more plants, more vegetables, fruits, legumes, and healthy animal products, which would be eggs and fish and healthy other, meat like chicken and so forth. And then the ones that had the bad bugs, they were calling them, they found that they had a diet in a high percent of ultra-processed foods. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by ultra-processed, because we depend on processed foods. We can't get away from them. Most of our food is processed. But what does it mean when they say highly processed or ultra-processed? That's a different category of food, and that got very prevalent starting in the 70s, but really in the 80s, the food companies started putting more and more additives into our food. So, story here is the people with a certain type of bacteria, the unhealthy ones, were eating a diet high in. And the reason that I put sausage on there, it doesn't have to be an ultra-processed food. It could be healthier food if it didn't go through the factory and have all these different chemicals and everything put in it.
Give me coffee, 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 coffee.
One of the surprises that came out of it, they found a bacteria in people who were coffee drinkers, who drank coffee like every morning. And it didn't matter if it was decaf or instant coffee, any kind of coffee, there's a particular bacteria that likes coffee. And if you didn't drink coffee, you don't have this type of bacteria. But if coffee drinkers had this type of bacteria, it happens to be a good one. It makes those short chain fatty acids, and it really improves the gut microbiome and like I said, it can be decaf coffee. Now the interesting thing is they didn't find the same thing for tea. They didn't find a bug that really likes tea. The other thing they did with this research is they looked at how these different groups, people with a healthy microbiome and the unhealthy microbiome, how did they respond to certain types of foods? So a person, now black is the healthy microbiome. So what they did is on the top layer there, they gave everyone the same meal, and it was pasta, spaghetti or something. It was a very high carbohydrate meal, simple carbohydrates. It turned out people with the healthy microbiome, their blood glucose levels didn't go up very much. They just went up a little bit and then came back down. So people with a healthy microbiome can eat simple carbs, they can eat dessert, they can eat, it's just the amount, the balance, if it's out of balance is where we get into trouble. So people with the poor microbiomes, the lower diversity, they had sugar spikes and the sugar stayed too high. And they did the same thing with fats. They fed 2 groups of fatty meal, and the people with a healthy microbiome didn't get a lot of fat in their blood. But the people who had an unhealthy microbiome, they had more fat circulating in their blood, so their triglycerides were higher, their LDL was higher. But it depends on the type of microbiome you have to start out with. If it's healthy, then you can eat just about anything you want. So what are ultra-processed foods? These are foods that aren't really food. They're primarily manufactured ingredients. So what happened was in the 70s, I think it was the 70s, when they came out with fat is bad for you. And so now, then they started manufacturing products low in fat. Well, they replaced the fat with some industrial chemical. And so you'll see this when you start to read ingredients lists. And Michelle's activity for us today is about learning how to read the ingredients of what's in our food, not just the food label where it tells you the calories and everything, but if you look at the ingredients, it will tell you if there's emulsifiers in there, if there's thickeners and all these different chemicals. One is an emulsifier that we use in our laundry. You put it in it's in the laundry soap to break up fats in our clothes, and they use that to get a certain kind of a texture in food. So if you eat small quantities of these, it's not causing a problem. But if your diet is primarily this type of food, that's what's causing all the problem today. It's not the table sugar or the butter, if you eat those in normal amounts. It's really the ultra-processed food that's doing the damage. Because what they do is when you replace real food with a food substitute, you're altering the chemical structure of that food. And your microbiome, your gut bacteria, don't know what to do with it. So you're killing off the good bacteria. And in all of these, the other thing that's a problem with ultra-processed food is the number of steps in the manufacturing process. Every step changes that chemical structure, breaks those bonds and moves things around. So to recognize them, when you look at the ingredients list, you'll see a lot of unfamiliar, usually it's a long list of unfamiliar terms. And that's a clue that this is more of a factory food rather than a real food. The average American adult, this is why we're in trouble now. It's more these ultra-processed food, but the average American eats 60%. And I only learned this, Michelle, but we've both learned this about 6 months or so ago. We started looking in our closet, in our own pantries, and what we found. So, the thing though is, yeah,
Full disclosure, we were eating some ultra-processed foods without even knowing it.
yeah, well, we did, yeah, most people don't know. But children, can you imagine children eating 60%? And then year after year after year, this is really taking a toll on their body. So this is another study, I'm kind of watching my time. This is another study that was done by the University of Arizona that got published in one of those prestigious journals, Cell Press. And what they did I say University of Arizona? I mean, Arizona State. This was Arizona State. Almost all the top universities now have a microbiome lab. They're all doing research in these microscopic organisms in our gut. But anyway, this particular study, they had the patients actually live in a hospital because they wanted to control exactly what they ate. And they fed one group a high fiber diet and the other group an ultra processed diet. But what they did is they gave them the same number of calories. So they ate the same number of calories, and they had the same percent of fat, protein, and carbohydrates. So what happened was the people on the high fiber diet actually lost about 217 calories a day. Their bodies didn't turn it into fat, they didn't absorb it. Whereas the ultra processed people retained those calories and gained weight. Also, they measured their blood. They measured the hormones in their blood, and they saw that those hormones were getting released that tell your brain that you're full, and the number of short-chain fatty acids increased. The other thing they did with this experiment, they switched groups. So they had, they reversed the groups that were on the different diets, and they got the same results. So it truly was the food they were eating that made the difference here. So the moral is to eat real food. And to read the ingredients list, not just the labels or the marketing material in the front of the package. Let's see, how am I doing with time, Michelle?
You're doing well.
Okay. I just wanted to take you through this example. This is a doctor in the UK, and he had a twin brother, and they were both healthy. And his brother came to the United States for 6 months and gained weight, and his health went south. He got a risk for heart disease, and all these metabolic markers were bad. And he wanted to know kind of what happened to his brother, and he suspected that it was more of the ultra-processed food. So he did an experiment on himself. Right now, most of us at a healthy level, to get a healthy microbiome, we can consume about 30% of these ultra-processed foods. If we can get to that level or lower, then we're doing good. So he was already around 30%, and he says, for a month, I'm going to eat an 80% ultra-processed food diet. So here's what happened. After only 4 weeks, he gained a lot of weight, just after 4 weeks. And they measured the hormones in his blood, and his hormones has changed. He wasn't getting those satiety hormones to tell his brain he was full. But the thing that really surprised him, and this was all done in the hospital, they decided to do an MRI of his brain before the study. Then they did an MRI after the study was done, after 4 weeks, and his brain had changed. It was rewired in the habit center and the addiction center. So in the area of the brain that wires our habits, it had changed.
In 4 weeks.
In 4 weeks. In 4 weeks of eating just the ultra-processed food. And he ate till he was full. He didn't really overdo it, but yet he gained all this weight. And then he had his brain checked 6 weeks later, and it was still at this level. So it took many months for him to get back to where he was.
Wow.
So that's all about ultra-processed food, and I said the guideline is no more than 30%. So for me, and I assumed I was a typical American, which when I looked in my closet, or my pantry. So I try to cut it in half, is what I'm doing. Because there are foods, once you start reading the ingredients, you can find the same food that isn't one of these manufactured foods. I want to show you another study about fermented foods. Do you all know what fermented foods are?
No.
A lot of people don't. I didn't know, a year ago, I didn't know what they were. But, so, these are 2 professors from Stanford. One's a microbiologist, the other guy is head of nutritional science at Stanford. They asked the question, how can we repair our microbiome and also improve our immune health? And they decided to look at fermented foods. What fermented foods are they can be vegetables or milk, but they're put through a process. They're raw, and they're put through a process where bacteria will eat the sugars in the vegetable or fruit or whatever, and then give off gases and create all these metabolites. And I'm going to show you the process in a minute. But if you've heard of kimchi or sauerkraut, those are made with a fermented process. If you keep them in a jar or in the refrigerator, and you can keep the live bacteria in them, and they become probiotics. So they're probiotic foods. So fermented foods have the bacteria in them, just like yogurt. We're all used to eating yogurt, but they have live bacteria in them. So what they wanted to do is compare, well, if we had people eat a diet, add more fermented foods to their diet, or if they added more fiber to their diet, would it improve their gut microbiome? So what they did is over only a 10-week period, because like I said, these studies are expensive. So in 10 weeks, they had a group of people eat 4 to 6 servings of fermented foods. Now a serving is really only maybe a tablespoon or so. It doesn't have to be a lot to get all those bacteria in there. The fiber people, they wanted them to get up to about 40 grams of fiber a day. The average American eats around 15 or 20. So we wanted to get them up to there. And then the measurements for are, do they increase the diversity? Do they increase the number of species in their gut? And the other measurement was on inflammation. They were looking at markers of inflammation. We're all probably familiar with CRP, but there's many other ones. There were 30 other ones that they looked at. So in the fermented foods group, they were really surprised. Over only those 10 weeks, they gained 25% new bacteria in their gut. And all those markers of inflammation went down. So just by adding this fermented food to their diet, they didn't have to change anything else. They reduced the inflammation and they added more gut bacteria. Now the puzzling thing was, of those bacteria that were new, only 5% of them came for the foods that they ate, those fermented foods. They actually picked up additional bacteria from the environment, healthy bacteria, they picked up from the environment, because when you eat fermented foods, you're not only getting just the bacteria, you're getting all of their metabolites, all those chemicals that they make, all those short-chain fatty acids. That whole community then makes it really comfortable for other bacteria to stick when you're eating or when you touch something, and bacteria are all over us and all around us. But then it kind of invites other bacteria to join in. The high fiber group, over those 10 weeks, they didn't increase diversity. It just wasn't long enough. If they had stuck with the diet for a longer period of time, they probably would have gotten more of them. But they did improve the function. They did get more of the good bacteria in their gut, and then they got more of those chemicals. This is the fermentation process if you ever want to try it at home, but it's complicated. But anyway, what you do is you chop up vegetables and put them in a saltwater solution, and they have to be covered because the good bacteria don't like air. They're anaerobic. They don't want air. So they have to be covered, and then you can put a cap on them, let them ferment for a while. Ferment means this bacteria that are on board on those plants, like the carrots and cauliflower, whatever. There's bacteria in all the vegetables and everything we eat. Well, when you put them in this brine solution and they don't have any access to air, they start eating the sugar in the plants. And when you eat the sugar, they give off gas. And so that's the fermentation process. And these bacteria start to multiply and start to make a lot of these good chemicals. And that's why live probiotic fermented foods are good for us. So here are different types of fermented foods. You may have seen them in Trader Joe's or in Whole Foods. And then, so those are considered probiotic foods. Prebiotics are what the bacteria eat. Prebiotics are plants. So bacteria like to eat legumes, nuts, any kind of fruit and vegetables. Here's where you can shop for them, mostly in health food stores. And getting close to the end here, these are the guiding principles to help you start to make changes in the diet. Now, stress is a factor as far as bacteria go too, so we have to try to eliminate as much stress as possible, or a reaction to stress. Sleep is important, exercise is important, but the number one driver, as I mentioned in the beginning, is food. And there's a lot of small changes we can make. If we can just eat a little bit of fermented foods every day, 1 or 2 servings even. And then they've done studies to say, okay, we want to get a variety of plants. Not concentrate so much on grams of fiber, but a whole variety of all these different plants, so we can get the diversity built up in our gut bacteria. And what they found they did a lot of these studies during COVID, and so a lot of us didn't hear about them until later on. But they've shown that kind of the sweet spot for the number, if you can eat a variety of 30 different types of vegetables a week, and that includes spices. Like I eat cinnamon every day, and that counts as a spice. Less than 30% ultra-processed food. And then antibiotics, which I forgot to mention. Antibiotics, if you don't need them, don't take them, because what they do is they wipe out, they kill all the good bacteria along with the bad bacteria. And our gut microbiome will recover over time, but it may not come back to what it really was in the beginning. It takes about a month or 2 months to recover, and for some people it could take longer. So sometimes we need to take them and we just can't help it, but if you can avoid them, don't take them. So that was it for me, my portion, the entertainment portion of the show.
This is excellent. Thank you. Yeah. We'll see if there are any questions.
So thanks so much, Jill. So I had a couple of questions that came in, and that was so fascinating. One of them was actually a question about antibiotics and what you can do to help limit the impact, based on if you have to take antibiotics and their effect on the gut microbiome.
Fermented foods. And there's a whole variety. There are more of them out there now since these studies became public. So I buy a lot of my fermented foods at Whole Foods because they have a big variety, but Sprouts has them, Trader Joe's now. Even in my slide, I showed a picture of the kombucha tea. That's a fermented tea, and it tastes really good. And it's low calorie too.
Good, okay. And another question that came in was about, does the pancreas affect the heart? And I'm not sure if you have that answer, but in your research, if you found anything, that was a question that came out as well.
Well, I'm not a medical person, but pancreas does make insulin, which affects our blood glucose levels. So I really can't answer it though.
Right, that would be just the loose connection, and I know I didn't know what you had learned, just through your research. And I know somebody also asked about the starting point for somebody who wants to improve your gut microbiome, and you sort of answered that at the end, and it seems like really cutting back on those ultra processed foods, and boy, I know that's challenging. I mean, that's a hard thing. I think particularly in our lifestyle these days, and just what we've been surrounded with. So it sounds like a lot of whole foods, right? And adding in those, adding in maybe some fermented foods as well to help with that. Is there anything else that somebody should consider as a starting point for when they want to improve their gut microbiome?
I think the starting point for me is to read the ingredients, back to ultra-processed foods again, because I wasn't in the habit of reading ingredient lists on a package. I was reading what the label said about calories and fat and so forth. I didn't realize the importance of the ingredients. And it turns out 71% of the food in our grocery stores are ultra-processed foods.
It's amazing. And seeing the studies that you showed of, the gentleman who just how he changed his diet and how that affected his gut was really eye-opening as well. Just how quickly it all happens. So trying to take good care of ourselves is really important. So I want to thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to wrap up with our online audience, and you can then take questions in person, okay? Thank you. So thanks so much for being here today. We will be back next week for our next talk, which is actually going to be about, we've not done a talk like this before, but it's going to be about dental health and aging. If you're interested in that talk, please join us on Wednesday, October 18th at 10 a.m. If you would like to watch us online, you could always give us a call at 520-324-1960, and we'd be happy to get you registered. Or if you'd like to come in person, we can also register you then at that time. Thanks so much for being here today.